Okay, so just to get a running start with a review, we started at the second half of last time, the 4 exceptions where you would be allowed to tell a non-Jew directly and therefore benefit from an Isser D'Rabbanan. And that's what we refer generally as shvus to shvus, a double D'Rabbanan. The first D'Rabbanan being the Amir La'akum itself is D'Rabbanan, and then you're asking them to do an Isser D'Rabbanan. So we said we have 4 cases. We did 3 of them. One would be the case of Hefs Meruba, a significant financial loss. Kavod Abrius, when there was human dignity at stake. And then we said Mipsas Choli, if there was a slight illness, one that you wouldn't be able to do an Isser D'Rabbanan, but you could have a non-Jew do an Isser D'Rabbanan. Okay, the 4th category will be a Makom Mitzvah, which has the, I guess, the most familiar ring to it of Shvus Shvus B'Makom Mitzvah, just that's the way it is. So this is going to be a individual mitzvah, as opposed to mitzvah derabim, a public mitzvah that we're going to discuss later. That's going to be even more lenient. So here we are discussing a personal individual's mitzvah cannot be done. So you'd be able to ask a non-Jew to do an Isser D'Rabbanan to facilitate a Jew performing a mitzvah. So, for example, if there was, let's say, what I refer to as a true Hachnasas Orchim situation. True Hachnasas Orchim meaning this isn't that your teenage girl wants a sleepover and you don't have the proper bedding or whatever, and therefore we need to do something. Okay, that's, I'm sure it's wonderful, it's reus, it's a beautiful thing, but it's not what we're talking about. You have someone who's literally from out of town, they don't have a place to stay, they're literally staying at your house because of Hachnasas Orchim, and you realize that you don't have the necessary sheet, you don't have the necessary mattress, whatever it is. So you could ask a non-Jew to carry, let's assume there's no Eruv, let's assume it's a place that wouldn't be a public domain, a place that could have an Eruv just for the sake of ease of case. So you'd have an Isser D'Rabbanan. So here you want to do the mitzvah of Hachnasas Orchim. You can't because you don't have the supplies, but someone else has the supply, they don't have the space. So you could have the non-Jew carry that through the Carmelists, through the non-public domain without an Eruv, even though it's an Isser D'Rabbanan, in order to facilitate the mitzvah. We use this a lot with the person going to the hospital on Shabbos with a childbirth situation to carry Sidurim and the like, or to carry other things that would otherwise not be part of the life or death issue with the woman in labor, or even the presence of her husband supporting her, but just tangential mitzvah items, they get, so to speak, grandfather in with this because of the this shvus to shvus b'makom mitzvah. When it comes to a meal, though, it's limited to the necessities of a meal to make it a Shabbos meal. So you could ask a non-Jew to violate a Isser D'Rabbanan to provide wine for Kiddush, Lechem Mishnah, a main course, but no extras like sides and appetizer. Right, so that you could not have the non-Jew, because it's not that that's not part of the mitzvah of Oneg Shabbos, but that's not the core mitzvah that we are being lenient on here. Another place that you could have a possible leniency would be if your light is off in your dining area and there isn't a real feasible way to have the meal in a different place. So assuming your lights are not incandescent, because that would be a doraisa, which you could not have the non-Jew do for a mitzvah, for a private mitzvah. But if you had LEDs or fluorescent CFLs, where most poskim hold it's a D'Rabbanan, so there would be a potential leniency to ask the non-Jew to turn the light in order to facilitate your meal in that place. Again, assuming that there really isn't another place to go. So this has an element of gray area. What is considered the mitzvah that needs to be done, what isn't. But where it is, you can ask the non-Jew to do the Isser D'Rabbanan in order to allow you to do your mitzvah.
So would this also count in terms of bringing like a baby for bris to a shul?
Okay, so we're going to talk about bris later, because bris is actually specific where you can be more lenient, although not in moving the baby. It's moving the stuff to the baby, but yeah, and we'll discuss that later. But anytime that a person needs something for a mitzvah, so then there is this leniency to have a non-Jew do an Isser D'Rabbanan to allow that person to do the mitzvah. Okay, it's one of those things that it's out there. You have to know exactly the limits of what's considered necessary for the mitzvah, what is not, but it's a useful concept as well. Okay, that is the 4 cases where you can have a non-Jew do an Isser D'Rabbanan on your behalf, and you don't have to worry about hinting, you don't have to worry about prohibited benefits. It's exceptions to the rule, which we suggested was because the rabbis ultimately were here to protect Shabbos, not to make Shabbos unduly difficult, so that in these cases where there is a very pressing need, the rabbis were happier to let you avail yourself of the non-Jews' help than put yourself into the nisayon of keeping Shabbos yourself. So this was a proper balance. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now there are just make sure I get the count right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 6 cases where we will allow even a Isser D'Oraisa to be done by a non-Jew on behalf of a Jew. So in contrast to what we started with, which would be Asr, and certainly prohibited to benefit from, and even if you could benefit, you would need to hint. Then we moved to Isurei D'Rabbanan, that you could ask directly, but limited to Hefsid Meruba, great loss, a covenant prius, human dignity, a slight illness, or a makom mitzvah. Now we move to the greatest cases of leniency, where you could ask a non-Jew even to do an Isser D'Oraisa. Right now, admittingly, the first of the examples is really a perfect bridge, because it's a technicality that you're asking them to do an Isser D'Oraisa, because it's really, you're asking them to do an Isser D'Rabbanan. So I'll explain. Shabbos, we know, goes from the end of Friday until the end of Shabbos. There is a issue in halacha precisely when Shabbos starts. So there are the 3 terms that we use would be shkia, short for shkia sachama, the setting of the sun. Then you have bein hashmashos, literally between the suns. And then you have seisa kochavim, or nightfall, when the stars come out. So seisa kochavim is certainly nightfall. Sunset is when the period of doubt begins of bein hashmashos, and then at some point bein hashmashos morphs into nightfall. So you go from daytime to sunset, you enter into the safek time, and then you get to nightfall. Right now, you go shkia sachama is sunset. That's the end of the day. Then you start the period known as bein hashmashos, the doubtful twilight. That's the English word they like to use. Neither certainly day or certainly night. And then you get to seisa kochavim, which is certainly night. Now, to make things more confusing, there is a dispute as to what sunset is. Okay, so this has to do with the precise thing that we refer to as sunset, if it has to do with exactly how much or the amount of sun which is below a certain level on the horizon. So in halacha, there are really 2 sunsets. One, which is what the scientists and the newspaper refers to sunset. That's the earlier of the 2 times. And then there is the second sunset, or what they'll refer to as the sunset of Rabbeinu Tam, which is later than the first sunset. All right, so we'll just try to make this as not confusing as possible. Until the first sunset, it is certainly daytime. Once you hit the first sunset, so you have to be concerned that it's nighttime, but it might still be daytime. Once you hit the second sunset, it is certainly not daytime. You're now in a twilight era. And when you hit nightfall, you're for sure into the next day. Okay, practically speaking, when does this come up? This is not related to Amir Lakum directly, but tangentially. The concept that you have another 9 minutes after sunset to say mincha, that is rooted in this second sunset issue. If you note, Ashkenazim, not this wrong word, Misnagdim do not rely on this, but Hasidim do. Ramosha says that we must be strict for Shmir Shabbos already from the first sunset. So once the newspaper sunset hits, we don't do malacha. Hasidim will be lenient up until 9-10 minutes. You can see, we don't have it here, but in areas where there are true Hasidim, you will see them driving to shul after what we call Shkia until those 9-10 minutes. They truly hold of the Rabbeinu Tam's sunset, and for them it's still daytime. Ramosha was fairly adamant that you cannot be lenient on Shabbos once you hit the first sunset, which is the mainstream general Misnagdic opinion. But to get the point, you're dealing with the first sunset. We are treating that as the end of the day, but there is, even for us, some leniency for that next 9 minutes. Beyond that, you're certainly in twilight, and then you're going into nightfall. Yeah. Yeah.
Did you say Ramosha?
Yeah, Ramosha is. I mean, there may be others, but in America, that's the big.
Thank you. Sorry, Hadlakas Neiros is at what time?
So okay, Hadlakas Neiros is a minhag to do it prior to, in America, the first sunset, and we do it in South Bend. Either at the Torah Center does 18 minutes. I don't know if HOC does 18 minutes or 20 minutes. I never paid attention to it because it's just not, it doesn't make a difference to me personally that much. But in Chicago, it's definitely 20 minutes. In Yerushalayim, it is definitely more than 20 minutes. I think it's 45 minutes. 40. Okay. So different kehilos have different minhagim, how many minutes before sunset. Certainly in America, it's before the first sunset. That's the timing, but that's a totally different thing. That's just Tosefes Shabbos. That's increasing on Shabbos. It's certainly daytime at that point.
I'm just trying to get my
Zman. Okay, so here becomes the issue. By definition, any malacha that's done prior to Seisa Kochavim on Friday evening can't be considered a malacha d'oraisa, even if it is a malacha d'oraisa, because it might not be Shabbos yet. So therefore, driving a car, writing a letter, cooking raw chicken, things that are without a doubt malachos d'oraisa, technically are not, because of not the malacha, but because of the timing. So the first case that we are going to describe, where you have a leniency in Amir La'akum, in that you can ask a non-Jew to do an Isser Doraisa, is a lot of semantics and word games, because really we're going to tell you can ask them to do an Isser Doraisa in a Zman that is an Isser Dorabanan. So the difference between this and the previous 4 cases, in the previous 4 cases, you were asking them to do something that is objectively in Isser D'Rabbanan, and it was on Shabbos. Here, you're asking them to do what is objectively in Isser D'Oraisa, but the Zman is an Isser D'Rabbanan, thereby making it, in reality, a double D'Rabbanan. So that is what we're saying. So the way we would say this is, you're allowed to ask a non-Jew to do an Isser D'Oraisa during Bein Hashmashos, because in logic, what you're really asking the non-Jew is to do a double Durabanan.
Why is that a double Durabanan?
All Amir Lakim is Durabanan. It always starts as Durabanan. Okay, so that's why it's double Durabanan. Okay, so therefore, as long as it's going to meet one of the previous 4 categories, it can be done Bein Hashmashos, because in reality, what I am calling and what the post can refer to as the first example of D'Oraisa is really the 5th example of D'Rabbanan. I suppose that writers of Svarim, maybe they got together individually, and they all had to decide, is this the 5th D'Rabbanan, or is this the first exception D'Oraisa? I think they opted for differentiating between what you're asking the non-Jew to do as opposed to when you're asking the non-Jew to do it, because I think that's just easier to differentiate. So what we're saying here is you can ask a non-Jew to do a D'Oraisa during Bein Hashmashos if it's for a Shabbos need, for a mitzvah, for a Hefzer Meruba, covered, all the same cases that you could have asked on Shabbos to do a D'Rabbanan, you can ask Bein Hashmashos to do a D'Oraisa, because in reality, that's a D'Rabbanan. Okay, but what is Bein Hashmashos? So it's going to be from sunset till approximately 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how you want to hold or how desperate the situation is. The reason why it ends between 30 and 40 minutes is very simple. Seisa Kochavim may begin as early as 30 or 40 minutes after Shkia. Now, each person is going to have a different opinion. Practically, what they hold Seisa Kochavim is for ending Shabbos. Some will say 42 minutes, 50 minutes, 60 minutes, 72 minutes, 90 minutes, whatever that is. All of that is a chumrah, a stringency in keeping Shabbos going. But if you say, I am strict and I hold Seisa Kochavim in 72 minutes, that does not mean that you have 72 minutes on Friday to ask a guy to do a D'Oraisa. It's very nice that you're strict with Shabbos going out, but you can't be the same strict with Shabbos coming in, because then you're not being strict, you're being lenient. So the same person who's going to hold 72 minutes Motzi Shabbos to do Malacha is still going to be limited at 30, 35. That person cannot legitimately tell you that their 72 minutes is not one of many opinions as to what Seisa Kochavim is. So if you want to extend Shabbos, that's beautiful. It's a wonderful thing. But you can't extend Bein Hashmashos in order to ask the non-Jew to do a Malacha D'Oraisa. Now you start at sunset, because at sunset is already when we will consider it Bein Hashmashos. So you already at sunset, you are limited to what you can ask in what scenarios, because it's Shabbos, but it's Bein Hashmashos. And then 30 minutes, 40 minutes, certainly not later than 40 minutes after sunset, you can no longer ask a non-Jew to do a D'Oraisa in this idea. Yeah.
So I realize lights are all off.
Yes.
For whatever reason. I just lit Shabbos candles. I can go to my non-Jewish neighbor and say, I can't do it, but I can ask you, can you please come over and turn on my lights?
Yes. I would, the only limitation I would put on that, and it's only a limitation to say it out. I don't think that you do differently just out of practice. It should have some area that's needed for Shabbos. So if it meant, I'm going to imagine an example. If you just want to light on in some other area of the house that you don't really need for any Shabbos need, I don't know why you'd want it on, but just hypothetically, whatever the case is, it really needs to be limited to a Shabbos need. We want to umbrella it under, because we have 4 categories to put it under, so we want to umbrella it under Tzorach Mitzvah. So any Shabbos need can be, grandfathered in as a part of the mitzvah of oneg and kavod Shabbos. So the examples that we usually use would be here for sure. If your light in your bedroom is on, now the truth is that that's not insurmountable anyways, because that you could actually hint, but you don't need to. If you get it bein hashmashos, you can just tell the guy to turn it off. Being able to sleep properly would be a legitimate need. Certainly, if let's say your crock pot is not plugged in or whatever, your hot water urn, these are all things that would certainly be isurei d'oraisa normally. The crock pot, you have to worry about bishul and the light, but okay, say you can overcome that, or it's partially, whatever it is. I'm just, as far as this halacha is concerned, so you could have the non-Jew do that up till approximately, again, 30. After 30 minutes, I would measure how important this really is. And then past 40 minutes, you really can't anymore.
I'm thinking like bathroom outside light.
Yeah, stuff like that you could have. And I would say I wouldn't say a more common or a better example, but a similar example would be if you were stuck in traffic or something like that, and you were getting towards Shkia, and you were some 30, 40 minutes away from your house by foot, which is 5-6 minutes in a car or whatever like that. So the idea of pulling over and then calling a cab or Uber or whatever to get you home, even though it's going to be after bein hashmashos, but it's going to be within bein hashmashos, that would be another example where you'd say to not be able to light Shabbos candles, or not to be able to be home for Shabbos, or not to, whatever those important things that you need to be there, that you got stuck in traffic, or if it's a man coming home from work or whatever, like whatever the case may be, to shower and get ready and be able to get to shul on time. So that's where you could start pulling, where you're driving, you realize traffic crash, something happened, you, with 10 minutes to go till Shkia, where you can still do malacha, you can pull over and then get yourself into a cab situation, set up or whatever, and then have them drive through bein hashmashos, and you have no issue. It's totally fine. If it was a situation where you'd be in danger without that ride, then it's going to be more lenient anyways because of pikuach nefesh and the like. But even in a case where there's no danger per se, it's just totally will mess up your Shabbos. So you have time. Also, when it comes to, let's say your wallet or you're getting those taken care of, put away or whatever. So you have this time where you could just communicate directly with the non-Jew after Shkia, when you've lost your ability to do things directly. So you have X number of minutes after sunset that you can avail yourself, and you don't, okay, some of these things are going to be derbanas anyways, but even the things that are deraisa, hypothetically, that would come up, driving certainly would be an example of that. You could be lenient. Certainly, anything that falls into hefsed meruba, even if you need a deraisa to prevent the loss, so you have that extra time to do that, and it's really not anything novel to what we already said. It's just a different application because it's redefining what would have been a malacha d'oraisa on Shabbos, now is a malacha d'Rabbanan, because it happens to be in the first 30 minutes after Shabbos. Right now, conceptually, this applies Motzei Shabbos as well, but in the time reverse. At the first sunset is not bein hashmashos yet to allow you to ask a non-Jew to do a d'oraisa, for the very simple reason that there is that second sunset. So you can be machmer on Friday to consider the first sunset bein hashmashos, but you can't be machmer a mekel on Shabbos to consider the first sunset bein hashmashos. It's the same idea, all in reverse. So whereas on Friday it becomes bein hashmashos at the first sunset, and bein hashmashos goes all the way until 30 or 40 minutes after Shkia, when it comes to Motzei Shabbos, it's not bein hashmashos until 10 minutes after Shkia, because those first 9 minutes are l'chumra still daytime. So you don't have this leniency yet. Then the leniency would then go from 10 minutes after Shkia until whatever time you hold is seis. And then whatever, whether it be 42, 50, 72, whatever that is, in that period of time, you then have this same heter in the back end, although the poskim are not as gung-ho about using this Motzei Shabbos simply because, I'm going to make up a statistic here, but 99 out of 100 times, you can wait 30 minutes until Shabbos is over. In other words, the scenario is reversed. Here, if you don't take advantage of it now, you're stuck for 25 hours. So we're going to be way more lenient to, okay, you need that taken care of right now, because if not, you're going to be messed up for a long time. Motzi Shabbos, you waited 10 minutes after Shkia, you need something desperately. So unless it literally can't wait 40 minutes, we're going to ask you to wait and then just do it yourself when Shabbos is over. So they're going to be less lenient in using this heter, because more times than not, you're not going to need to. But if there was literally a great need, and it really was a matter of minutes, so you do have from 10 minutes after Shkia until whatever you hold as Seisach Kavim, you do have a leniency that, in a Shasat Chak, in a tough case, where you could then ask a non-Jew to do something for me. I suppose if you could figure out a case where you can justify absolutely having to make a flight or something like that, like it's critical type of thing, and the only way to get there would be to get into a cab, like 20 minutes after Shkia. I suppose there's a possibility if there's a hefsed, like that, maybe there'd be a heter. I doubt that there's that many cases in reality that would fit neatly into that, but theoretically it's out there.
What about a woman going to give birth taking muksa items?
When are we talking about? Who's moving it?
The Motzei Shabbos, like
She's in labor.
She's in labor going to, so on Shabbos she could go for sure.
Right.
But she can't take anything.
Well, she's more limited in what? Okay, so here again, does
here if she wants to take her entire bag.
But does she?
The camera, the phone.
I would say also they probably just have someone else bring it 20 minutes later, 30 minutes later. I mean, okay. I mean, it's out there. It's not that relevant, but it exists. It's the flip side of the Friday evening, which was far more useful practically, but that's the deal. Okay. Now, that is the link case, because that technically is both the fifth of the Durabanans and the first of the Deraises. All right, the next thing is arguably the most important leniency that you'll use to bail yourself out of not all, but many Amir La'akum issues. Okay, that is the fact that it is only usher to tell a non-Jew to do a malacha. Whereas if you tell the non-Jew to do a objectively permitted act that will automatically trigger a malacha, that is not a violation of Amir La'akum, and that's even if the malacha is a d'oraisa. So, yes, I'm going to give it a term. We would refer to this, you may be familiar with the concept of psik resha. So psik resha, and this is, again, once you hear this once, you'll never forget it. So if you've heard it already, you didn't forget it. And if you need to hear it, you won't forget it afterwards. So the idea is, in the olden days, before Wilson and Rawlings and Nerf came out, so kids still like to play with balls. So they didn't really have a ball making concept. I don't know why it's so hard to invent a ball, but they didn't. So they could use rocks, but they have their shortcomings. So apparently the ball of choice was a chicken head. Okay, they would used to play ball with chicken heads. So the only way to get a chicken head is to remove it from a live chicken. Now the chicken then becomes a dead chicken. So the expression in the Gemara will be this idea, psik resha, literally means you sever the head. The idea is the kid does not want to kill the chicken. He just wants the head to play catch with. So the act of getting the head is not a malacha. There's no isser of head harvesting. The problem is that every time you harvest the head, the chicken seems to die. Okay, that's the Talmudic expression, psik reisha v'lo yamus. If you remove its head, will it not die? And this becomes the catch-all phrase for the inevitable result of a malacha. In our world, especially in the Mir La'akum world, it's you open up the fridge and the light turns on because you forgot to shut the light off. Okay, that would be your classic psik reisha, which is really going to mess you up on Shabbos. The kid left his project in the car and you can't open the door because the light will go on, or you left something important in the car and you can't open it up because the light will go on, or
Medications like those, we had that once with medicine and stuff.
so
That was critical.
anytime you have something now, okay, I'll tell you also one of the most important cases is going to be, at least in my opinion, hot water. So without getting into all the particulars with hot water, so just on the most simple level, in a normal situation, you cannot turn on the hot water tap on Shabbos unless you have preset your hot water heater to less than Yad Soletis Bo, which there are people on earth who do that, and give it enough time to cool down before Shabbos. There are people who do that. They're not me. I just don't need warm water enough to do that, but you could do that. But if you didn't do that, so what ends up happening is in your water tank is hot water. If the water goes below a certain temperature, it heats it up again. So it's constantly hot water. So the minute you pull the hot water tap, you release hot water into your sink, and new cold water from the city enters your hot water tank in your basement, and it instantaneously cooks. So the problem with taking hot water is psik reisha, or to put it in our time, I don't want to cook water. I don't want the chicken to die. I just want the hot water currently in the tank. Well, I got news for you. Unless you shut off the spigot to the city, which there are people who do that also, that would also, then you could,
Why would you cut it?
because then you could drain your hot water tank on Shabbos.
Because it
It won't refill, right?
Neither will your toilet or your everything else.
Depends how you're set up. If your hot water is coming in separate, if you have a shut off valve on the hot water heater, you can shut it off going into the hot water heater without affecting the rest of the house. That can be done as well. Again, we don't do that, but it theoretically could be done.
There is a family here that
Does it? Okay, you could do it. You could do that. So if you didn't, though, this would be psik reisha. I don't want to cook more water. The truth is, I don't mind cooking more water because then I have a full tank of hot water, but that's not my goal. My goal is to get the hot water that's currently in the tank. But just like the chicken, I can't get the head without the chicken dying. I can't get the hot water without the new water. So therefore, you're not allowed.
That's another example of psik reisha.
Right. You are not allowed to turn on the tap, even though what you really want is pre-cooked water. You don't want to cook water. There's just no way to get pre-cooked water without cooking new water unless you played with it. So that's the same concept. I want the head. If it was up to me, the chicken would live. I have no interest in killing chicken. They just happen not to live without a head on. So it happens to be you can't get the water without the new water coming in. So it's psik reisha. Now, what happens if someone turns on the hot water by accident? Okay, so generally speaking, the way we look at it in halacha is that if you are in a single family home and the water is still very warmish to hot, so then the assumption is the tank is still mostly hot and the water that has come in has already cooked. So when you close the tap, you don't increase any cooking because everything that came in already has cooked. However, if you discover 2 hours later, 3 hours later, that the hot water was left on, so what's usually going to happen is the temperature of the water that's coming in the tap will be, it's not going to be cold because it's still going, but your heat, your pilot light will be flame it will constantly be burning, but the water will be significantly cooler to the point where it would be very arguable that if you then shut the tap, the water left in the tank would significantly rise in temperature. So you wouldn't be allowed to shut the tap, because that again would be a psik ratio. Really, you don't want to cook the water that's left in there. You just want to stop the flow of water. And the truth is, you want your gas to stop going in because it's draining money and it's running the hot water heater unnecessarily long. But if you discover that a well-meaning child, who's told 100 times to wash their hands after they use the bathroom with warm water and soap, and they did not chop that Shabbos, we don't use the warm water, and they have the water, and they also didn't chop, you need to turn the water off, which they don't always chop that. I guess adults don't always chop it either, but certainly kids don't. And then you discover it an hour or two later, and the water is slightly cool. Now you're really in a bind, because you can't shut that water off. And now if this happens Friday night on summer Shabbos or whatever, you got 20 hours of constant water loss, and your hot water heater is going to be on. So here would be a case where you don't need to hint. You could tell the non-Jew to turn the tap off, because the act of turning the tap off is not a malacha. Where is the malacha? When the tap gets shut off, the water will get trapped. The fire will then cook it. That's a psik reisha. The isser of Amir la'akum is to tell the non-Jew to do a malacha. You didn't tell the non-Jew to do a malacha. And the same thing would be.
The Jew can't do it himself.
Right.
Turn that water off at that point.
Correct, right. That's the point.
Right.
And the same thing would be if I knew the light would go on in the fridge, right? So even if it's a LED light, which basically all refrigerators are nowadays, it's still an Isser D'Rabbanan. It's a psik ratio. When I open that door, the light's going on. However, I can tell a non-Jew directly to open the door, because the act of opening a refrigerator door is not a malacha. It happens to be that I can't open it without the light going on. And similarly, the opening of a car door is not a malacha. So I can then ask the non-Jew, can you please open the door so I can get the thing inside? You didn't tell them to do a malacha. Opening a car door is not a malacha. It's not even muksa probably, but that's a different story. It's nothing, except that a light goes on. And therefore, you can't do it, but you can tell the non-Jew to do it, which is very helpful in these types of scenarios, because it's just much easier. Now, in all these cases, hinting would probably work, because there's no direct benefit when the water goes off, because, well, you might have to wait until the amount of time after Shabbos it would have taken for it to heat up, okay? It's going to be seconds. I mean, it's not a real, it's not a tangible or it's negligible, especially since that Shabbos is really ending much earlier than you're ending Shabbos. So it's not really going to be practical. Certainly in the case of the car door and the light, assuming it wasn't so dark that you couldn't see what you were getting without the light going on, then the light is almost always going to be an additional benefit. Right. So, these things would have they could have been done, but it's just so much easier to tell the guy to open the refrigerator as opposed to, something else. Yeah.
So if you discover this Friday night, how would you then tell the boy to keep it closed?
All right. So this actually happens. I actually have a story. It's actually it's a fun story. So it's a fun story on many different levels. So it's good. This was, I believe, 2 or 3 Pesachs ago. It was the year that you had Shabbos going into the Seder. It wasn't this year. Certainly I think it was 3.
COVID year?
Maybe. But we went to Shul. So.
Oh, so maybe not. And you were here in South Bend.
Yeah, it's within the last 3. Okay. 2 or 3 years ago, whatever it is. So you had Shabbos, Pesach. That's how it was. So my wife discovered Friday evening to Shabbos going into Pesach that the light was on in the fridge, to which I said, when she said, oh my gosh, the light is on, I said, it's impossible. We never have the light bulb in, let alone on. She goes, no, in order to clean for Pesach, I put the light bulb in so I could see better. So this work just, it's very hard to get mad at the quote unquote incompetence of leaving the light in when the light was put in to clean the fridge that you didn't have anything to do with, and she did. So that passed. It was a relatively easy nisayon to deal with that. Okay, so now we have a halachic problem, but this isn't like leaving the bedroom light on. Where how could you do that? Okay, it's a legitimate mistake. You were cleaning the fridge, fine. So, but now you have a real problem because we need to open this refrigerator and close it now for 2.5 days. So like, there's no like short-term fix that's going to work. Right, so we let it go, and the door, because you can't really close it either, because that would close the light. All right, but luckily the refrigerator door is of the such that if you don't have it all the way open, it will figure out a way to close itself. Okay, so the refrigerator did end up closing itself, and then close. Fine, so good, but we can't get any. Okay, so that was it for it was already, it's spring, it's South Bend, it's probably already 9:45, 10 at night. It's just forget it. We're not dealing with it. We'll deal with it tomorrow morning. So I go to Shul and I asked Rabbi Bullman, I said, which guy is here? Because I'm fully aware that this is a very relatively easy fix. You'll see the whole thing, but you need to have a guy do it. So which guy is available? So apparently they were all coming back on Pesach. No one was there. There's no kiddush. There's no reason for there to be there. There's no guy in there. But there was the police. It was a police woman. So I went to the police woman after. Here's the trick. You got to get her to come to the house. Now, that's not so impossible. You just don't want to tell her to drive to the house. So I knock on the window. Hello, thank you for, okay, I need a favor. Can you do me a favor? Now, generally speaking, you can't ask for a favor, but I wasn't asking, the favor wasn't a malacha. The favor is to open the refrigerator, which is not a malacha. So it's fine. I need a favor from you. Okay, what's the favor? So I said, it's easier for me to show it to you in my house. Okay, so can you please come to my house? But I'm walking there, so you don't need to be there for the next 20 minutes. Okay, at that point, she could walk, she could drive, it's her problem. Okay, she ended up coming roughly 20 minutes later, and she drove naturally, but that's not my problem. I told her I don't need her there for 20 minutes. All right, so she shows up. Now, she's walking into the house. To this day, we joke, did she radio someone and say, I'm going into this family's house. I don't know what I'm doing. If I don't call you in 5 minutes, send back. Like, did she just totally trust, like, I'll never know. I didn't ask her, but I'm just an ongoing curiosity. In those 20 minutes, did she communicate the fact, and I don't even know protocol, is she on duty? Is she even allowed to do this? I don't even know how any of that works, but okay. Sure enough, she walks in the house. I say, we need help opening the refrigerator door. Can you open the door for us? Now, I can't even imagine what she's thinking, because like, it's just like a week, like I can't even imagine, like, what is this? She probably just thinks Jews are nuts. Okay, so she opens the door, and I directly told her that. Okay, fine, door's open. I'm sure she just does not get what the issue is, because there was nothing difficult to open the door. She's opening, so now the door's open. So now the trick is, you can't tell her to unscrew the light bulb. Now is where you have to hint to her, right? But you can't ask her for help from this point forward. You can't mention the malacha, but the benefit is going to be a indirect benefit. The truth is, it's going to be a zero benefit, because I couldn't care less if the light was off or on. It's useless. There's light in the room. It's a total indirect benefit. So we start describing the concept, which she's got to keep the door open. That's the idea. So she's looking in the fridge, and basically we're describing how, you see, the light is on. okay.
That's quite normal.
The, right, the light is on, like, so we can't say we need the light off. We can't say just, so it's basically along the lines of when you open the door, the light is on, just constantly repeating the same thing. So finally, she gets it. You want me to take the light off? You can't say it. The light is on. All right. So then she finally hops and she reaches, she can't get at the light easily. So she says, can I like move the food out of the way? Yes, you can move anything, you can do anything, you can do anything you want. I mean, just the light is on. Finally, she figured it out, she unscrewed the light in, and that was the end of it. But throughout there was like my whole family who was there. She's alone, like just still like, what is she thinking? But it worked. But what made it that much easier was because we could have communicated in direct terms to get her to the point where she was looking into the fridge with the light open. That's half the, getting the person into the house is almost always half the battle. Because what do you say to a non-Jew to get them to come into your house? Like the time where the mix master was on. So again, there, if you don't use Hefsid Meruba, so then you're going to have to use a hint. I need to show you something in my house. Like are you crazy? Like, so if you say, can you do me a favor, come inside, at least you've started, but you can't say that because the favor is ultimately the turning off of the light. Here, it was easier because the favor was opening the door. And that's mutter because that is a psik ratio. So that's much easier. But that's half the battle. It's getting in the house. So once I could easily get her in the house, and now put everything aside. So as she was waiting, I was already teaching this. So it must have been within the last 3 years. So I was already teaching this. So I said to my family, I said, we're gonna have fun, as long as we're getting this, it's gonna be class material. So we better get our money's worth. Technically speaking, I could have told her directly to unscrew the light bulb. Why? Because as long as the light bulb is in, I can't open the fridge. Now, the fridge has my maror, the fridge has my seder, it's 4 yontif meals. And so this would be your case where you have b'makom mitzvah. Now, the light is LED, so it's really a d'Rabbanan. So this, technically, I could have asked her directly, shvus to shvus b'makom mitzvah, and I didn't need to do the hinting, but I could not pass up the whole experience of trying. It takes all the pressure off because it's like playing taboo, but if you miss, you don't lose. You just get another chance. So if we messed up, then who cares? It was like a free opportunity because ultimately the situation was such we really could have asked directly. So we tried to do it with hinting just to practice without any, but that became a Maisa that is now lives on, but that's the Psibresha aid. Yeah.
So are you allowed to like prime your Shabbos goy?
So you can't tell them to do malacha before Shabbos for Shabbos.
No,
but you can't hint to them. So part of hinting to them certainly is you can educate them on the basic things that are going to come up, because that's certainly not going to be any worse than a hint. You're allowed to mention, you just can't tell them you should do malacha for me on Friday night.
No, but like I go to my next door neighbor tomorrow and say, hey, by the way, if I ever come knocking on your door, it's Friday night to Saturday night.
It probably means I need help. That's fine. What you couldn't do is say, if I knock on your door 3 times or whatever, that means to turn the light on. That's the same thing as telling her to turn the light on before Shabbos, on Shabbos, or when you knock, that might even be on Shabbos. But to tell her that, that when I ask you to come and I say something, it should mean that there's probably something to do with it. Yeah, that you could set up in advance. And it's probably, a good idea and whatever. Okay, so that is the first of the true Doraisas. Now, the truth is that in the case of the car and the refrigerator in the modern era, they're not going to be incandescent, so it's probably going to be Durabundant anyways. So it's not as clear, but the water is Doraisa because you're cooking the water. So that would be a case where you can then tell the guy, can you please, I need a favor, can you shut my hot water off? No, you don't want to say it that way. Can you turn my tap off? Yeah, can you shut my hot water off? Like, I guess that's also okay. The malach is, you're not telling them, can you please cook the water in my tank? All right, so you could say, can you turn the tap off? And that's fine. And then you can ask them to do a favor, you can ask them to do it directly, and yeah. Okay, there are 4 more d'oraisa leniencies. We'll save them for later.